Let's get you more on this now. Let's bring in SABC News International editor Sophie Mokoena, who joins us now on the telephone line. Thank you so much for your time, Sophie. So how has President Cyril Ramaphosa's intervention been received?
Well, many people are saying that that was an indication that he has responded to the calls that South Africa as a neighbor must engage stakeholders in that country so that a solution can be found. And as South Africa is doing that, South Africa is not going to dictate how this should happen, but try to facilitate that stakeholders find one another in terms of what needs to be done, particularly to ensure that there's no destruction of property, there's no killings, and also to avoid a situation where Mozambicans find themselves in a very difficult situation because the continuation of protests and the standoff may lead to more deaths, but also challenges in terms of their supply chain. Now, the President's envoy, Dr. Sidney Mufamadi, met the President of Mozambique where they spoke about this issue because it is also part of the fact-finding mission before you can perhaps make some suggestions and proposals. Now, the intention is to ensure that the South African envoy is able to interact with other stakeholders, particularly the leader of the official opposition now, Mondlane, and unfortunately he is in Europe. As you heard, they have announced that the protests will resume tomorrow up to the build-up to the inauguration of the President-elect Daniel Chapo. And therefore, that is why South Africa is trying to find a way in terms of ensuring that there's an amicable solution to this standoff that has led to so much destruction in that country.
So, Sophie, this could basically just now be, a race against time, seeing how we also heard that announcement that you just mentioned now by the leader of the new official opposition that protests will resume on Monday. What does this now mean for Mozambique? More destruction on the way?
Well, when he announced that there must be a pause in relation to program of action, he requested people not to engage in looting and destruction of property. Because remember, as a leader, when you encourage your supporters to engage in destruction and looting, you must know that ordinary people will lose confidence in you. As we see now, business very aggrieved because there's a huge damage to business, and also people on the ground might be restless because now the supply chain is a problem. We are told the food price has gone up, and when you start to have that kind of a situation, it becomes problematic. So we don't know how are they going to execute the second intensified program of action, and on the backdrop of him calling on his supporters not to engage in destruction. But it's very difficult when you call for protest to avoid that kind of a situation. And also the security establishment or officials staring on protesters and people dying. So that is why countries and those who are concerned about peace and security on the continent and in the region are trying to speak to all stakeholders. So you can't avoid distraction. When you have a program, a massive program of action like that, I've just received a message that the Mozambican Medical Association of Doctors and Medical Personnel will at 2 o'clock start some protest or stage a public vigil to show that the health sector is also stretched, and it's very difficult for them. I think if they have to travel to these institutions where they must give the help, they are also struggling. When there's no transport, when there's protest, movement of people, goods and services is a problem.
And Sophie, as you're mentioning now, seeing also the medical sector, coming in as well to say that they are also overwhelmed by what is currently happening right now. What does this mean? Are we likely to see maybe some progress on that front now that we're also seeing the medical sector, also coming in?
I don't think so. The problem is Frelimo and the current government, the outgoing government led by Filipe Nyusi, is adamant that everything is under control. They will be able to handle the situation. So we are waiting to see whether that is sustainable. But we know in all these countries where there has been disputes, the issue of using force cannot lead to lasting solution because people will continuously die and the damage to the economy of the country will be massive. Peace and security of the country will be at stake. And therefore the question is, when Mozambique government is saying, President Nyusi saying, everything is under control, they will be able to handle the situation. Will they be able to handle the situation? Because when you look at the destruction, the reports we have is that a number of public offices have been destroyed. Some are putting a number to almost 100 in different regions. You look at the courts, the administrative buildings, Frelimo offices also being torched. In Matola, the main industrial park, factories have been set alight. And you can imagine this is manufacturing hub. And therefore, when I talk about the supply chain, on the other hand, the aviation is also affected. We see some planes now refueling in South Africa and not being able to spend time in Mozambique. Another issue is that you have the Maputo mayor saying that more than 30 buildings have been destroyed in Maputo. On the other hand, that would include more than 50 private sector infrastructure, including the banks. And therefore, it becomes a problem even to rebuild. In Namakura district, which is 70 kilometers from Quilimani, there has been also massive destruction of infrastructure. I think the region that's much better is Cabo Delgado. Cabo Delgado, why? You have the Rwandan forces working with the Mozambican forces to bring stability and peace in that region. So you still have strong security arrangement in that region. And if that gets out of control, it will be a problem because the insurgents might regroup and using their weaknesses there. But President Nyusi is adamant that everything is under control and the inauguration will go ahead. On the other hand, Mondlane is saying from 12 midnight, they are going to start with protests. So we'll see tomorrow what's going to happen in terms of the response of those who support Mondlane. And on the other hand, what President Nyusi has arranged in terms of security personnel to try and quell the protests that are likely going to turn violent.
And Sophie, ironically, this is all happens, at the backdrop of what we'd call democracy in action, just after, elections that we've seen there. What does this really mean about the people that it affects the most? And that is people on the ground. Just how intense is this right now? Because as we're having this conversation as well, I'm seeing those visuals that are currently unfolding.
It's quite difficult for ordinary people because, as I pointed out, movement of people, goods and services gets affected when you have these protests. And therefore, people can't find the basic foodstuffs. And now that, because many industrial parks have been affected, the manufacturing will be affected and food prices will go up, and therefore inflation will go up. We saw the International Monetary Fund already reducing or tampering with the economic growth of Mozambique from 5% to 4.3%. So it doesn't spell good news for ordinary people, including those who are in business, because after this announcement that the protest will resume tomorrow, you can imagine the fear in relation to business, those who have survived thus far, whether this time around our business are not going to be affected. And also just the infrastructure that is still there, not small, huge infrastructure that's still standing. How many this time around will be affected, adding to the numbers. And therefore it is a very difficult situation, but as I pointed out, the outgoing president is saying everything is under control. They will be able to manage this situation, but is that sustainable? We will be watching as we head to tomorrow.
Certainly, we'll be watching that with a keen eye. That's SABC News International editor Sophie Mokoena. Thanks very much indeed for your time.